So, hey, excited to have everybody here today. Really looking forward to hearing from Carissa Niehoff from the Nfhs. But before we get rolling on that, I would love for everybody to take a second to pop into the chat room. And I want you to just briefly put a summary in there of what has fired you up lately, all right? I talked to Dave Ticker on Monday about our offering our conference in person again in April, and then potentially some options surrounding that. But that's got me fired up to get back together as a group, to learn together, to bounce ideas off of each other, to just meet in person, have a couple beverages, and just enjoy each other's company. So what has fired you up lately? Maybe it was Brian Kane a couple weeks ago. Maybe it was something that's happened in your district. But jump in the chat room, drop in there what has fired you up, and share some juice with everybody today before we get rolling. And yeah, there we go. Grandpa, here we go. So without any further ado, I want to respect everybody's time, but please keep throwing those fire ups in there. And BJ, take it away to introduce our speaker today, please.
Absolutely, Cole. Well, that's a great way to start our day today. Find something positive. So thank you so much. Hey, gang, it is my honor to introduce to you our speaker on this fine Wednesday, early December. Welcome to December, everyone. Dr. Carissa Niehoff. For those of you who don't know, Karissa in August of 2018 shattered the glass ceiling when she was selected to lead our national organization as the executive director of the Nfhs, and she was the first female leader in its 100-year existence. Dr. Niehoff started her career as a teacher and a coach in Connecticut, coached teams to both conference and state titles, and her skills allowed her to serve several different roles in education. She was an athletic director, an assistant principal, and a principal, both middle school and high school levels. 20 plus years in education. She was selected to be the executive director of the Connecticut Association, and the 6th woman to lead a state association at the time. So she did that for several years before she went to the Nfhs office. About 10 days ago, as you guys probably remember, we hosted a Women in Sport conference, and Carissa had encouraged several of her Nfhs staff to attend. And of course, we cornered them a little bit and asked them how things were going under Carissa's leadership. And they described her as compassionate, intelligent leader, and that she has provided an environment they didn't even know they were missing, which was a strong female leader at the helm, and that she has empowered them and has established several initiatives at the Nfhs to really support and encourage diversity. So I'm super happy to have her today. I think her well-rounded approach to leadership is going to serve our national association really well. So Carissa, on behalf of the Washington State Athletic Directors and our WIAA office, thank you for giving us the gift of your time today. So without further ado, I will hand it over to you.
Well, my goodness, thank you for that introduction, BJ. And a little bit speechless. I didn't know the staff was, when you ask staff, for some candid comments on things, it's flattering to know that those were their thoughts. And congratulations to you for that great experience. They all reported on a daily basis that that event was just terrific. So kudos to you and your team in the office for offering that opportunity. So good morning, everyone, from here in Indianapolis, where we're approaching the lunch hour soon, and we know that it's still coffee hour out on the West Coast. So thank you very much for inviting me to be with you today. I will first bring you well wishes from the Nfhs. We all very deeply hope that you are well, your families are well, and your fellow staff members in your respective offices and schools are doing well. We want to commend you for your efforts over the past 9 months as a state. The messaging that you've been doing, your exercising of truly outstanding leadership acumen has been a national model for other state associations. And Mick, under your leadership, the office has just done a great job exercising diplomacy, educational efforts, great support, high energy, and just tireless commitment to the kids, to your programs, and to the schools in Washington. So from the national office, we really commend you and thank you for all that you're doing in your state and how you're influencing the national landscape. You have truly balanced care, caution, common sense, and camaraderie. So for all of you in the field, athletic directors and others on the call, stay the course, keep up the great work because you're doing a tremendous service. And I wish you the best of luck as February rolls around and you actually get some things going there. We've been paying attention to not just the messaging that you've been doing, but to your calendar of events. And before I offer further remarks, and I do have some notes in front of me, so I don't go off script too much, but do appreciate your time too. But please know that if the NFHS office or anyone on our staff can be of service to you and your schools, please don't hesitate to reach out. Our staff has remained fully engaged and high level of concern as to how we can best support you. So feel free to call us if there's anything we can do. So as you all know, BJ and the team invited me to join you today to offer a few words of support, maybe a little bit of update on what the national office is seeing and doing. So I'm here to do that, again, on behalf of all of us in Indianapolis. Certainly amid the very real COVID fatigue and the frustrating fluidity, all of the challenges, all of the unknown, first, I hope that you as people feel that, especially in this holiday season, that there is so much to be grateful for and that there is light at the end of the tunnel. I think knowing that vaccines are on the horizon, that so much learning has been done, even if the energy is waning, please lock elbows even stronger than you have been. Let's look to that light at the end of the tunnel. With the holiday season upon us, knowing that holidays can be very hard for people, with the issues of loneliness, loss, and lack that probably have been exacerbated this year like never before, let's all continue to pay attention to personal connections that we have with our families, with one another, and offer those gestures of care however we can. The NFHS wishes you a healthy, safe holiday season going forward. Professionally, as colleagues, we are excited that the AD conference is just ahead of us. We have over 1,200 people registered for that virtual experience. So obviously this is hopefully the 51st annual, yet the first and last of its kind being all virtual. We truly will miss seeing you all in person. We will certainly miss the learning together, the socializing together, hanging out in one another's rooms and maybe sharing a drink and a story. But we're going to try to do that virtually as best as we can. And following that experience, we have the NFHS winter meeting. Right now, we are intending to stage that in person in Bonita Springs, Florida. About 22 of our state executive directors and commissioners, along with board members, are still planning on attending in person. But for those who can't, we will be filming it. Rick Wagner, that many of you know, who runs around at the AD conference, will be filming that live. So there'll be a virtual option for those that can't attend in person. But we're excited about those opportunities to reconnect, even if it is virtually, just to have eyes on one another and kick off the year 2021. We also have the Rules Committee meetings coming up, and I want to offer great thanks to those of you who have provided incredible service to the NFHS committees, whether they be rules committees or other, and many of you in Washington have done that. So we owe a great debt and a lot of gratitude to the state of Washington for all the great contributions you've made to the NFHS. One of the things that we've been really excited about, and over the last 9 months in particular, is the tremendous collaboration that we've seen nationwide among state associations and in particular athletic director communities. Some of the things that have emerged are new networks that have been meeting in some cases on a weekly basis for athletic directors to connect to collaborate, to commiserate, and just to share, what the heck are we all doing with our situations. One of the groups that has formally emerged this year, you're probably aware of, is the NOMAD group, the National Organization of Minority Athletic Directors. And that kind of grew out of the West Coast and now is a national community of over 200 ADs, minority in particular. And the energy that they have around their board of directors, their advisory board, their strategic planning is just fantastic. And of course, the women's leadership that's emerged. And BJ, you've been central to that. So again, the tremendous forward thinking of athletic directors in particular is influencing the national landscape and the work that we're doing at the Nfhs. We are excited about that. The sharing of expertise, the efforts that you've really raised to priority level around recruitment and mentoring is just terrific. And your sports seasons are on the calendar. And again, we hope that those can come to fruition and play out as you have them planned. One of the things I think that we all are very aware of is that we are at a critical point in our journey through this COVID pandemic. The point that we're at now with the vaccines on the horizon, with sports seasons on the horizon, is one that absolutely demands a balance of reflection as well as a lens forward, how we're looking forward, how we're thinking forward, and how we're working forward in new ways. I think we would probably, if we're golfers, would say that the year 2020 is probably worth a mulligan on the whole year. And as we look to 2021 with excitement, we need to stop and think about what we're going to pack as we go into next year. What are we going to take with us in terms of perspective, new learning, new commitment, and new collaboration? We think we should absolutely take stock of what we've learned and what has been reinforced that we've perhaps always known. What have we realized through both the positive and the negative experiences of the past 9 months? Prior to opening the meeting, we were just talking informally with the office staff around whether or not there's actually been some silver lining to all of this. What have we been forced to do very quickly and do better? And what do we think we could commit to carrying forward, even as we do shift back to whatever the new normal might look like? Some of the things that we've learned at the Nfhs that we hope we can share with all of you, especially the athletic director community. Obviously, we've learned that we need each other and we need to be connected. We know that there's research, healthy relationships with other individuals and groups actually helps to regulate every system in the human body. Compassion and gratitude have been shown to increase our overall levels of happiness. So whereas COVID has challenged our capacity to exercise humanity and thereby has underscored the need to do exactly that, we know that it's going to be important going forward to continue to commit to demonstrating kindness, altruism, a focus on the greater common good, and a focus on service, maybe in broader, deeper ways than we have before. And maybe empowering our kids, our colleagues in our schools to be engaged in our programs, to really focus on the broader efforts that the sporting and co-curricular community can provide in terms of service. Something else that we've learned is that kids need each other and they need us. We are probably all pretty familiar with the Wisconsin study, which looked at the impact of school closures on over 3,000 high school kids. And Mick, I think you referenced the Wisconsin study a number of times in your op-eds that you've been doing on your website. Looking at the data about the shocking increase in anxiety, self-reported, 65% or more, 68% increase in depression, 50% reduction in physical activity, and the anecdotal report that quality of life is down. We know that over the past months, many other studies are being done, and they're realizing similar findings. So something for us to take forward is, what can we do to get in this lane, to inform ourselves and be armed with evidence and really start to message that evidence in new ways so that we capture ownership of that voice. In our educational communities, we need to be the leaders. We need to be the voice about the impact of co-curricular experiences or the lack thereof. And I think we can elevate our leadership in our own level of respect by using some of that voice that's armed with data. I would never hesitate to say that probably along with the position of high school principal, the position of athletic director is the most misunderstood and underappreciated position in the school system. So I think now we can use what we've learned through the COVID pandemic to position ourselves as leaders and necessary leaders at the table when decisions are being made within the school district. We know that there's a wealth of research about the impact of engagement on academic success and the development of a multitude of skills and attributes. Academic perseverance, absolutely contingent upon whether or not a lot of our kids have the opportunity to get through the first half of the school day to participation in the second half of the school day. That's our program. So I think we really need to champion our voice in this. A fourth thing that we've learned is that we have a heightened opportunity to influence. Athletic directors can broaden the scope of the work of the school overall, not single-handedly, but in a new leadership role that I've just kind of been referencing. So what are we talking about here in terms of doing this? I would say that we need to look at the who, what, where, when, why, and how about this new opportunity to influence. So the who, that is absolutely collaboration. No one group owns this work. And I think in sport, in other co-curricular activities, historically, there's been a little bit of tension around the decision-making power, around ownership. We see this broadly outside of school with the national governing bodies, with professional sport, with youth sport, where the money goes, who really has the healthiest experience for our students. Some of the participation data in youth sport is troubling. Kids dropping out because they report not having fun. So what can we do now in the education-based environment to step forward and step in front, to invite collaboration within our communities, within our schools, to talk about the value of participation, not fighting over who gets to make decisions and who really is the authority in youth sport. The NFHS wants to work with the NIAAA, with all of you, boots on the ground, about how those decisions and conversations can happen. Our state associations have been doing an amazing job collaborating within the section environment at the national level, and our executive directors and commissioners have just been phenomenal, tireless, collaborative, and are really helping the NFHS as a leader in the national landscape become really highly respected. And that's raising the respect that we have for schools and the work that you all are doing. So that's the who. The what. What work are we talking about here? Well, as we become more educated and more armed with data that talks about engagement and talks about growth and development, the work really is about kids more than details and logistics of operating programs. We know that you know that, and you're committed to that. I think our frustration is the culture around us, is the community around us expecting us to just put the programs on and organize the buses and get the officials, or are they looking at us as leaders to talk about why these programs matter to their kids? Are our parents open listeners to what you know in school and what they need to do to support what you are doing and what the role of that parent is? So if we talk about the who and now the what as being deeper and richer, the role that athletic directors play and how we can support you is going to become more relevant and raised, and I think hopefully a priority on community radar. The where do we do this? Everywhere. School and community as always, but now obviously we've become much more expert at the virtual world. So staying connected and active virtually, what a terrific platform for keeping that work growing and going, broader and deeper and in live time. The when is whenever, 24/7, and that doesn't mean longer hours to the athletic director's day. Certainly your days are long enough, but having the collaborative energy and resources, perhaps the when is on our websites, on our platforms, in our messaging, so that there's always live resources available and live advocacy for the work that you're doing and the information that you have to share. So it's always the why. We have always felt the why. That's the business that we're in, and we know every day that we watch kids engage what that why is all about. I would challenge us now to learn a little more about the why to improve our own practice and the role that we play as experts. I've been mentioning this. The more educated we are, the more data that we have to present, the more evidence-based decision-making that we can exercise, the better advocacy for our programs we will be doing, and the more we can lead to ultimately our mission and vision, which is engaging more kids. So how do we do all of this? How do we go through the who, what, when, where, and how, and why? We really do need to seek out research. The Nfhs is investing 6 figures into revising our participation survey, our research efforts on a national scope to better capture the numbers and trends. We really want to be able to tell the story about impact of participation, both short-term and long-term. And we want to better understand perception. Perception of parents, of coaches, of officials, of athletic directors, and of community at large about the importance of the work that we're doing. If we can gather more research and share that with all of you, we can better arm you. And if you all come across research that you can share with one another, we will all collectively become better educated and informed and tell a more sophisticated, informed story. I think if we can expand our professional learning beyond research as well, we can deepen our knowledge. If we ask ourselves some essential questions, what do we need to know about those whom we serve? What do we need to know about our kids, the adults involved in our programs? What are some of those socioeconomic demographics in our community? What are some of the challenges that our kids are facing at home? What are the resources? Are we lacking? Do we have appropriate resources in place? What do we know about learning itself? Are we informed in terms of socio-emotional wellness, what we call emotional IQ? What are the best practices that are out there, and where are the gaps in practice? And what data do we have that can help us to tell that story? We have to also think collaboratively and strategically talked a little earlier about the importance of collaboration. None of us can do this alone. And I think sometimes, I'll just speak through my own experience, it can be frustrating to be a leader, whether you're an athletic director, a state association director, an executive director, when you're challenged with all of this work and all of this responsibility. You can feel like you're standing out there or hanging from a limb by yourself, and it's cracking. So I think it's important for us to not be afraid to reach out, to ask for help, to explore what else we can learn and do, resources we can share, and how we can start to form our thinking around an appreciative inquiry approach. There's been a lot of work done with appreciative inquiry, and essentially what that means is that we bring our challenges and our issues to the table with others, and rather than bring a suspicious eye or a finger pointing, we bring our strengths and we share what we all do best, what we all do well, and how we can capitalize on that collectively, and then say, where are the gaps? Who are we missing at the table? Or what have we been missing in terms of effort or resources? So I think in addition to research, professional learning, we've got to think collaboratively and strategically, and do so with an appreciative lens. We need to ask ourselves, what does success look like? If we're out there advocating for more resources, changes or shifts in programming, we also have to be ready to say, we want to be outcome-based. Start with the end in mind. What does a different program look like? What does more opportunity look like? What do new programs that we want to introduce look like? Why do we want to avoid cutting programs when budgets are tight? And what is that risk to reward? What is our return on investment? How do we as athletic directors work with school leadership and district leadership, and to talk really about the advantage of growing programs as opposed to cutting? What are the standards we have that we measure our programs by? And how do we make decisions based on evidence? So a lot of that is sort of the mindset in education in general, looking at the end before we begin. We can do that through athletics and co-curricular programs, especially now when finances and resources are especially tight. And we can be the ones to really talk about the damage that can be done through cutting of programs. A few other thoughts that we all can do is to get out in front of opportunities to be in the public eye. What you all have done here in Washington on a weekly, I love what you're doing. Programs like today, staging those regular professional events for membership, perhaps opening up regular events for the media, to get out in front of issues, to be out in front with messaging. And that doesn't cost a lot of money to do that. Just to be on a schedule so that people know that you're transparent, you're available, and maybe it's not a lot of new information to share, but it's simply a Q&A opportunity. But doing that provides visibility, transparency, and it presents us in a role that we are the leaders in this space. It's important. And then finally, I think for all of us at any level that we're at, we've got to get a seat at the table, the proverbial tables. If you're an athletic director, get a seat at that table of whatever, if you have a community committee about returning to activity, if it's a school-based community, if it's a committee that involves multiple schools, if it's state health agencies or local health agencies, however decisions are being made, get that seat at that table and be persistent about that, so that the athletic director perspective, your role as leaders, your voice as leaders is heard. So those are some of the things that we at the NFHS want to support you in your thinking, in your working, and your going forward as we pivot from 2020 to 2021. And we stand ready to celebrate you, support you in any way that we can, and certainly want to get your feedback through Mick and his team, reaching out to us through your contacts on committees or in our office to know what we can do to better serve athletic directors. Finally, I'll just share, I will literally list 1 through 8, the NFHS Board of Directors priorities that have been identified for this year, just so that you as the athletic director community kind of know where we're thinking. We want to work on the NFHS as a national leader in lifting state associations in their own roles as leader. But we also want to have our office be a lead voice in the education-based scholastic space. We want to work, number 2, on diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. We've been working for months in the office. We will be engaging our strategic planning committee and asking them, we're bringing a portfolio of our work to this committee in the start of the year, asking them to identify DEI work as a strategic priority. We are continuing to develop out the National Federation Center for Official Services. We've got 11 states that are using the COS in some form right now, with another 6 to 8 who have already identified that they would like to be on for next year. Hopefully, as that platform gets better, more service-oriented for state associations at no charge, it can help athletic directors, school districts, state associations be able to address officials management, but also a lot of the school management issues that you all face on a day-to-day basis. 4th priority is technology. We went through a technology audit a little over a year ago that came out with a 45-page summary of things that are going well, but in full transparency, a lot more things that we need to address immediately. So we have done that. We are well underway with revamping everything from infrastructure to securities to housing data in the cloud and resources for state associations. And so a lot of these things are happening simultaneously. It's a massive lift, but we recognize that we are in dire need of being a better technology company for our membership. 5th priority, revenue sources, like all of you, probably looking at ways to address continuously rising costs without putting the financial resolution for that onto membership. So we're trying to think creatively in our office about new revenue avenues without raising dues or fees or things like that for the membership. 6 is a communication and marketing strategy, another area that we realize we are behind where we need to be. So we've created a chief marketing officer position, and that's Mark Koski. He's still working as the liaison for the network, so that work is not compromised, but really trying to become a better 21st century national company in terms of how we communicate, advocate, and market the NFHS brand and the great work being done in state associations. Priority 7 is our SMAC, continuing to support our SMAC committee, research, whatever work that they need to do in guiding us in communicating with all of you. And finally, the network. A silver lining perhaps to the COVID pandemic is that a lot of people have turned their attention to the network to observe any activities that are happening out there. The Pixelot initiative, which essentially is 2 free Pixelot cameras for each of the 19,500 high schools that are members of our state association, has gone exceptionally well. We just got the ask for our 10,000th camera. So while installation is scrambling right now and the play on staff is growing, we're doing our best to keep a pace there with getting those cameras installed and active. But that will be, of course, a priority for our board of directors as we continue forward. So I have done a lot of talking at you all, and my apologies for that. Just again, we are absolute champions of the work of athletic directors. Really, really applaud how you've stayed connected, engaged, flexible, nimble, and absolutely deeper committed to our kids and programs. And we stand ready to celebrate you and support you however we can. So happy to take any questions you might have of the NFHS. Hopefully it didn't put you to sleep there, but again, thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you, Karissa. That was wonderful. If anybody has any questions, feel free to throw them in the chat or unmute yourself and ask if you'd like to. And then we'll kind of hand it over to Cole to move us through the next phase of what we got going on. So Karissa, thank you so much for your time today and your leadership. We're really excited to partner with you and continue to see where we go.
Keep up the great work, Washington.
Karissa, thank you so much for your time today. Can't tell you how much we appreciate you taking time out of your day to talk to us Washington folks. So yeah, thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Be well, everyone, and have a great holiday.
Same to you. As we move on here, we have Mick coming up in just a second to talk a little bit about his op-ed. But before we do that, I'd like to let Dave Ticker say a few words about a Final Forms Q&A that's coming up, as well as some clock hour information.
Yeah, first of all, let's talk about clock hours. All of these WSSAAA Wednesdays, you can get clock hours for. The national conference that's coming up, you can get clock hours for that too. We'll put that information out in a little bit. Final Forms is going to be having a question and answer. Steve Frucci, I think you are on. Do you want to say a little bit about that?
That's just going to be a quick thing next week. Everybody should be getting an email explaining it and having a link to it tomorrow. I believe that will be coming out from, I believe actually from the WIAA.
Okay. One other thought before we move forward, I just appreciate Carissa's message. And as we keep getting data and we keep hearing things and we get studies and we get understanding of how things are going, you know, we're all pretty good listeners, but then there comes a point when we need to be from a listener to the messenger. And there's a lot of people in our respective communities that need to hear from us as the messenger about who we are and what we do. You know, so when she talked about being engaged and having a seat at the table, that is vital. We cannot sit back and let other people make decisions that maybe don't have the understanding or bring to the table the information and the experiences we have and the benefit to kids. So just want to strongly encourage everybody to be the messenger, to be the messenger. Appreciate all you guys are doing. Okay, cool.
Yeah, hey, so one other thing, I don't know, obviously every one of you individually, but one of the conversations we've had in our CWAC league is including superintendents in some of these conversations is their attention is not towards athletics necessarily right now. We've got to somehow bring their attention to athletics if we want to fire up when we're able to fire up. So if you haven't already started engaging in conversations with your superintendents, I would encourage you to start planting the seed at least to make sure that they're at least involved in the decision-making process, which I'm sure that most of your superintendents are, but that at least the conversation is being started to ensure that once whatever we're waiting for to happen, whether that's a vaccination, whether that's our metric numbers going down or being changed, as soon as we're allowed to participate, it's going to be their call to give us the green light or yellow or red. So make sure you're engaging in those conversations and possibly even involving superintendent voice in your league meetings as well. I'm done talking. Mick, really excited to hear from you and really thankful and appreciative that you released that op-ed. Nothing but positivity in response to that in Ellensburg and sounds like elsewhere across the state.
Yeah, it's funny. My kids who like to go on Twitter and watch me normally get roasted said, "Dad, there's actually people saying nice stuff about you. This is amazing." So that's a first. I will say with full transparency that I had a lot of help in writing that. I put together an outline, but Casey Johnson, I don't know if Casey's on this call, but he made that thing sing. And then he allowed me to even go back in and edit with him for a few days. So it was definitely a team effort. And, you know, we know the timing of it is not ideal in that we're in the midst of this huge spike, but we've also learned as we've pushed for that seat at the table in the decision-making process, it takes a long time for those decisions to change. And so we want to make sure that the social emotional is being factored in, as well as looking at all the examples from around the country that we now have, so that we get a commence in February. So yeah, it was, we were willing to take the risk because really, I mean, that's our job, and that's the expectation. The other piece I would share is, you know, I hope you really were able to listen to some of those nuggets in Carissa's presentation. My experience with her is I've actually gotten to interact with her quite a bit since I came on board last year. And prior to that, when I would attend those national conferences, it was very what you would expect, a typical environment and conversations and topics to be covered when I was a board member. So I had the opportunity to do that for 3 years. And going back there now and talking to the staff and seeing what's going on, it really is a difference maker. And I saw in the chat there was the opportunity for people to still sign up and attend the women's leadership. And I wasn't able to make it all 3 days, but I was able to sit in quite a bit. And I will tell you this, from a male's perspective, I learned more just being uncomfortable in the room than I did from anything else. And the specific example I can give you is I sat in on a breakout session, and at the start, first of all, nobody is talking. And it was people from around the country as well as people within our state. And you know, I private messaged BJ and I said, hey, if I'm stifling conversation, I can get out of the way. Because I didn't really know what my role was in that room anyway. It's women's leadership, right? What experience do I have in women's leadership? And if people are afraid to say or talk about the challenges that they face because I'm in the room, I need to get out of the way so they can have that conversation. And BJ assured me, no, stay in here. And for 40 some minutes, I listened to this conversation, and the whole time not knowing my place in that room or how I could help or when I should speak up. And to the point, Joe Keller gave me a private message, said, dude, you gonna talk or what? And it was just this really unsettling feeling. And so towards the end, I shared that. And the conversation, the feedback I got from some of the ADs in the room was really helpful. And it went on past that with people who reached out to me individually who were in that room to talk about, even though we have some people in our ranks that are incredibly strong, still the self-doubt and just that what they go through to enter a room with a bunch of white males essentially, that is our typical makeup, people like me. I didn't even understand, you know what's out there, but you don't really understand it. And I got to experience a little bit just from being there. So my advice to anybody out here is, find those opportunities to go into those meetings, because it was a great learning experience. It'll change the way I try to engage folks when they're in a room, especially if I'm in a room that I'm responsible for. But moving forward, even if it's a room I'm just a part of, to make sure that there's an overt, not in a singling out, but really a more of a welcoming way, despite how strong some people feel. And that could be a new AD, no matter what he or she, where they come from or their experience, that enters a league or a district or comes to one of our meetings. So anyway, I just want to say, if you get the opportunity to sit in and listen to the conversations in there, I think it will be well worth your time. It was incredibly valuable. So BJ and Sam, thanks for providing that opportunity. And for those of you that participated, thank you. Again, we haven't heard a whole lot of movement with the metrics, other than there's a lot of conversation out there right now, and the media has picked up on this, about the return to school decision tree metrics changing from a high rate of 75 to 100,000, possibly going to 200 over 100,000. And so that's significant for us, one, to have the opportunity to go back to in-person learning or a hybrid model, which we're hoping will translate to our guidelines as well. And in my conversations with superintendents, there's a few groups that invite me in on a regular basis out of their ESDs. There's some I haven't spoken to at all. But in the last 2 months, there's been really a shift in what I am seeing in superintendent thinking from, they understand the ability to pivot with athletics and activities much quicker than with opening up schools, right? They have their there's CBAs, and the biggest issue that, other than fear of putting kids back in school, is staffing. And so there's a lot, especially in smaller, more rural areas, that if they have to quarantine teachers, I heard from one small school district that just shut down their hybrid and some of their in-person learning on the peninsula. They had 56 registered subs and only 6 said they were willing to sub until a vaccine came out. Well, it's really hard to sustain in-person learning, for everybody in that type of setting, let alone your nutrition services and all your other support staffing. So it's important that we get the message to our superintendents of that athletics is different in that perspective, because they're going to be overwhelmed with that. I mean, superintendents right now we're in a bad spot with athletics in activities, but superintendents, it's amplified. And so we want to make sure they understand we're supporting their efforts. We understand where they're coming from, and we want to be part of the solution. So please make sure that that conversation, that if you have the ear of your superintendent and or school board members, or you get the opportunity to go in and speak at a board meeting, that you share a plan of how you can help alleviate some of those logistical challenges. So because we know F rates are up, we know attendance is way down, and there's also FTE for funding long-term next year included is going to be based on getting kids connected to their education. And that's really our greatest gift that we bring to the schools, is we connect kids to their education. Our greatest gift to kids is we give them the opportunity to have some fun and learn incredible life lessons. So, I think that's a role we can play. And that's really what we were trying to get across with our op-ed. Also that, we appreciate, and I will say this over and over, that we appreciate the conservative approach the Washington leadership has taken to date, because at the start of this, I use the example back in March and April, we had the US Surgeon General tell us wearing a mask didn't matter, right? Because that's what we knew at the time. I mean, that's the best information we had. Now, what's the number one thing? Wear a mask. And so we've learned so much over 9 months. Our request isn't to say Governor Inslee or Department of Health has missed the boat on this. That's not what has happened with this. What they've done is they've put us in a position to have the opportunity to play this spring. We're just hoping that their decision-making includes the new information we've acquired over 9 months from around the country and really around the world on how this can happen. And schools opening is definitely one of those areas. And with that, we get to be part of the process. So that was the intent of it. I'm happy it's well received. I wasn't sure how that was going to go. I made sure Tim Thompson supported it, so I didn't get a pink slip immediately, that at least they'd have a board meeting before they did it. And again, I can't thank Casey Johnson enough for making that thing sing. I mean, that thing flowed the way it flowed based on his gift. And so, and then other staff, Andy Knapp and other staff took a look at it. They all, I was at everybody. I mean, that's just our style, is everybody had to look at it to make sure there wasn't a point we're missing. So it was truly a full staff event, but Casey really gets credit for the flow of it. So I don't know, Cole, if that helps, answers what you're looking for from us, but that's what we know at this point.
No, we love hearing from the boss. So appreciate you not only putting yourself out there, but also, having this frank, genuine conversation with us. So, well, if there's any questions, feel free to jump them in the chat room, but I don't think there's anything else on today's WSSAAA Wednesday agenda. But Jeff Lowell is going to take it away and move to the WSSAAA Wednesday extension, WWE, to discuss a few things as we move on. So Jeff, go for it.
Hey, I'm sorry, Jeff, to cut you off. Cole, can I just throw one thing out there? We're hoping to bring an esports recommendation to our board here in December. So assuming that Justin's leading that work for us, so assuming we have that all buttoned up, which we think we're confident we will, that we're going to ask the board to review and possibly take action on an esports, which would allow us, hopefully we anticipate commencing some type of esports activities by the end of January, start of February, no matter what's going on with the pandemic. So we're hoping to have that. So I know a lot of you have been asking that question. So that's probably the first thing that you'll see on the horizon is we're at least to the point where we can make a recommendation to the board. We need to finalize it, so they haven't even seen it yet. But if you're antsy for that, please hold on. And the other piece is on the technology. We know that there's some concern about what we're going to do for brackets and league and district tournaments with the whole arbiter change. And we're working on some solutions. Had a meeting this morning with a group that might be able to help us out with that. We've met with Mark Martin as well yesterday. So we're trying to bring a solution in the short term. We thought we would be there by now, but in all honesty, it's just one of the things we have not been able to invest enough time in with everything else. So we're on it, and we want to try to make that as painless as possible for all of you, knowing how important that is. So those are the two big project things that we hope to bring forward sometime in January to the group.
Hey, Mick, before you go anywhere, there's a question in the chat from Eric Sievertson. Are discussions happening to allow sports to change risk classification by wearing masks?
Yeah, so that's what we're pushing on. And Karissa actually put out her weekly column that she sends out nationally about, and it mentioned 10 states that are currently wearing masks. And so one of her staff members I emailed during her presentation, and I got the names of those states. So we're bringing that. That was one of the things that, the doctors went in and discussed. Is it possible to reclassify sports if we wear masks in them? And, which ones are feasible and which ones aren't. And so we're doing as much research as possible. We knew of 2 states that were using masks. Michigan was one of them, and then they got shut down. And then Colorado used them for softball finals. But now we have a list of 14 actually that he sent, even though they mentioned 10 in the letter. So we're going to go back to that. We'll share that with the Department of Health and Governor's Office to make sure they have that information to review. So we are hopeful that at least outdoor sports will all be possible with masks if it's feasible. And then also all indoor sports is what we're really shooting for. Again, all we can do is bring the information and the argument forward, and we'll see where it goes. So yeah, thanks for the question.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, and good to Stevens, the high risk sports, exactly. That's really where with the masks will make the biggest difference. So that's what we're trying to find out, the experiences of the other states, and then how Department of Health and Governor's Office will equate that. So,
Dave Ticker, go for it.
Yeah, just briefly, I want to talk about the conference. Our conference is scheduled April 24th through the 27th. I'm encouraged and hopeful that by then we'll be able to meet. That being said, Cole and I are working together maybe to extend those dates to a June date. He's working with our speaker, and I'm working with the convention center, possibly, which would be a good thing, because hopefully we're going to be competing during that time, and everybody's going to be up to their eyeballs in competition and trying to work things out. So trying to run a state conference in the middle of some of that might not be the best timing. So we're going to just see what we can do about maybe pushing it to June, where everybody's done kind of with their respective commitments. Because this is the first time we've done this in 2 years, and we want to get people back to that conference. And that being said, I just received a text message from Todd Whitman, who does our clock hours from 24/7, does the WIAA clock hours too. He just told me that he's giving us $10,000 for scholarships for WSSAAA member kids that are seniors this year. He's been doing that every year for the last 3 years. And the fact that we're not even in our buildings now and Todd's still stepping up and doing that is just incredible. So what a great partner. And there's a number of you that are on this call that have been the recipients of some of that scholarship money. And we'll, the next WSSAAA Wednesday, Todd will be on there again, speaking to clock hours for the national conference. And then again, just kind of reiterating how to get clock hours for WSSAAA Wednesdays.
Thanks, Dave. Good morning, everybody. Let's, I'm going to jump in. We have a few things that we can talk about. Some of it is follow-up from last week. I wanted to report back to those who were on the call last Wednesday. We had continued our conversation about HB 1660 and some issues that end up, or that school districts are still working through, arising from that change in the existing law. And one of the things that came up was the idea of a consent form, the idea that those who qualify for free and reduced lunch or those college-bound scholars program, those that qualify for that program as well. And how do we make sure that they actually have consent? And so one of the things that many of us are using right now is final forms to register our kids. I happened to be on a call with Clay Burnett on Monday, actually, and talked to Clay. And Clay and Steve and Macklin and the entire team at Final Forms is going to be taking a look at how they can do some proactive work so that we don't individually have to go back to them to talk to them about the potential to use the Final Form system for a consent form. So I'm going to describe that. What I'm planning on doing is putting together some notes from what we talk about today during this extension time and make sure those notes get to everybody. And I'll just describe what they're working on right now. So anybody who's using Final Forms, just stay tuned. That's something that Clay and Steve and Macklin and the rest of the team there at Final Forms is working on for us, staying out ahead of compliance for us. But giving them the detailed information about that particular nuance of our state law was something that was good for them. So I wanted to give that update. And then if any of the executives want to end up talking about this as well, the minutes from the WIAA Executive Board meeting from November. Tim, I see your face there on my screen right now. If you want to talk about anything that came out of the minutes. I'm a huge proponent of going back. You hear about what happens in one of those executive board meetings, but there's a lot of really minute details that come out of those minutes that's really good for you to go back and read. And one of the things that has not really been called out, but I'm going to do it right now. This is a great thing that the WIAA did for their members. They went on to their executive board page and they actually have minutes going back, well, I don't know, 10 years or so now. So if you want to find minutes from many years past, you can actually go into this spreadsheet they have with all those minutes and all the attachments and everything there. But this last executive board minutes, I think is really key. One of the things that I really try and pick up on are changes to the handbook. And one of the things that did get voted on at the last executive board meeting was a number of changes to the executive board, or to the handbook. They're executive editorial changes. There's 3 or 4 of them. I think it'd be great for everybody to be able to read through those. But just to highlight what they are, just alignment of language in many cases. So the rules 17.7, 17.8, when we're talking about what has been termed off-season conditioning, that term is now out of season. So there is no term off-season ever being used in the WIAA now. The only term that's used is out of season. That then is applied to the open gym rule also, and has been aligned in the Q&As for 17.7 as well. There's an update to Rule 1725, the rules governing the international competitions, to also include the national competitions in there too. That would be good for you to look at. Rule 20.2.2 has been updated. It was updated earlier this year in an executive board meeting and an editorial change. And that 20.2.2 is the rule that says coaching stipends and all gifts to a coach exceeding a total of $500 per school-sponsored WIAA sport. And the rule was changed earlier this year to say in a calendar year must be approved by the school's board of directors. In this last meeting, calendar year was further defined. And so now it's $500 per school-sponsored WIAA sport between the first day of the summer activities period until the final day of the next WIAA school year. And so you have a real defined period of time that a coach can get paid that extra money. And we have talked for years about the fact that summer is really looking forward, not back. So that's why that's defined that way. There's an update to 20.4.4, also an editorial change, just removing the language that a CPR course and CPR certification has to be renewed every 3 years. There was also a decision to add back procedures for a fact finding, and then a new appendix for diversity, equity, and inclusion, a tool to help help as we continue to grow as an association. So those things are really key, and I feel like need to be pointed out. So if anybody has a chance, I'm going to link those in these notes that I send out, but you can also go back and look yourself. Another thing quickly that I'll end up, I'll put a shameless plug out for. is that NIAAA conference. There's still time to sign up. And one of the things that I know has probably kept people from doing this in the past is that they get pulled away from their school and potentially for 3 days or so. Beautiful thing about the NIAAA conference this year is they're actually extending the activities over about 10 days. And so what you have the opportunity to do if you sign up is actually to sign up for LTI courses each day next week. They're actually offering a Monday through Friday. They are in the middle of the day because we're here on the West Coast and they're doing things on East Coast time there. So they're between about 11 and 3. So if you have the opportunity to register and you really want to look for an opportunity to get some really detailed information in a very specific area of our work, sign up for those LTI courses. And if Tim Thompson or excuse me, Eric Titus or Cole, if you want to speak to any of those classes also as our coordinators for the state, turn your mic on and jump in right now.
There's a full offering this year. I mean, every single LTI course is being offered over that time period. So if you're in pursuit of any kind of certification, or if there's a class that piques your interest, definitely do it. They're going to have solid instructors. It's a little bit of a grind with a 4-hour Zoom meeting with a few breaks in between, but definitely worth it in my opinion.
I'll also say that they have some mediocre instructors. I'll be teaching 510 and 508 next week as well. And those are on Tuesday and Wednesday, those legal courses. I get a fantastic opportunity to work with the legendary Lee Green. And Lee does a fantastic job of bringing a legal mind and legal expertise to those particular courses. And the rest of the staff there, Peg Pennypacker and some others that are really some extremely talented individuals teaching those legal courses. Eric, jump on in.
Yeah, if you're able to take a look at that schedule up there too, obviously the early morning ones, which would be 6 a.m. for us, are the 900 series courses, and those are international courses for anybody looking to maybe head to Australia, maybe to be an AD. You could take a look at some international courses there. But again, as Jeff had mentioned, they are Monday through Thursday, and then Friday starts in with some typical conference things that are going on as well. So the first breakout session and schedule is at 2:40 Eastern. So that'd be 11:40 here on Friday. Friday, December 11th is when that starts.
We'll go back. Rick O'Leary, that costs you $1. So in the Kinko conference, if we ever go,
sorry, I typed slow.
An agenda item, we always end up saying it costs somebody $1. Usually paid up in the lobby of the hotel at the WSSAAA conference is when it's usually paid up, if you catch my drift. But Rick's question, 1811.2G, the removal of that is an editorial change. So I'm actually gonna lean on either Tim Thompson or Mick or somebody else who was at that meeting. Kathy Schick, I saw you're here also. If one of you could jump on and tell us why that was removed as an editorial change, it'd be great.
Let me look it up to make sure I have the right one. It's eligibility. BJ's are.
Yeah, it's
on
the
that.
F1
50-mile rule.
Yeah, BJ, if you can. So it's the, and if it's going to take somebody a minute, that's fine. We can, you guys can look that up, and then if you have an answer, just raise your hand or get my attention. One of the other things that I was hoping we could end up talking about for a few minutes today, or is something else that was mentioned in that executive board minutes, or in those executive board minutes, and that's the 2 amendments that are being actually presented on behalf of the board this year. And one of them is the proposed change in the gender identity appeal process. And another one is the requirement in the coaches standards for diversity training and mental health training. So if somebody that was there at that meeting can end up giving us just, and I could speak to the gender identity one, I suppose, but anybody who is there can talk about the second one, just to give us an idea of what we're going to see. And then I hope that that can lead into other potential amendments, just to give people that are on the call an idea of how many and what type of amendments that we're going to see this year. And then from there, we can end up talking a little bit about the timeline and the fact that there's some changes to that timeline this year that I think are going to be really important for us. So let's go back to 1811 2G.
Yeah, Jeff, I think I can speak to it. There was an AD that had brought up to us that when the amendment was written last year around eligibility, the intent was that what you see in G in the handbook was not there. It was getting replaced by what you see in H. It's the way the amendment was written. And then even when you look in the front of our book where we list all of the past amendments, that's the way it was listed. So it was just a typo error that what you see in G was supposed to be removed and replaced with H based on the amendment process. So we were just cleaning that up.
Got it. Thank you. No, that makes a lot of sense. Okay. So one of the things that I'll jump in, I'll talk a little bit about the gender identity appeal process. You know, sitting on the gender identity committee with BJ and Justin and Stacy Ward and Russ Waterman, and we had a number of other people that were on this committee as well. And so for well over a year, we ended up talking about the gender identity language we had in the handbook. And the one thing that really ended up jumping out at the committee more than anything else is the fact that we actually had a separate eligibility process for a very specific group of students. And that although 10 years ago, that was revolutionary, that after 10 years, what it did was actually, you know, potentially discriminate against a group of students, and ended up putting that particular group of students at a higher level of scrutiny than any other group of students that we have participating in our sports. And what we talked about at length over the course of about a year is how can we really align our eligibility processes. And so what we have worked on is actually doing exactly that. And what you're going to see in the amendment is actually taking most of what you would have looked at in the gender identity rule. I believe it's 1815. But what you would see in that rule has been removed. And the relevant and important pieces of that particular rule where it used to be have now been embedded in our eligibility process for all students. Okay, and so what we're the intent of this particular this particular amendment is going to be to make sure that students who are showing up at any one of our desks to try and participate in a sport at our schools get the same benefit that any other student would. They would get the same type of questions that an athletic director would ask. You know, the things that need to be asked to make sure that you're going to be able to declare them eligible, which is what our job is. We're looking to find a way to declare a kid eligible. And then should you run into a roadblock and you're not able to declare eligibility for that particular student, they then have a path to appeal. And the way this was written previously, that student, if they were declared ineligible at the school, really didn't have a path to appeal that ineligibility. This actually allows them now to appeal. And what it also does is protect the students from what we've seen a couple of times in the last couple of years. And that would be, you know, I show up at an event and I'm running an event for a league or at a district level or at the state level, and a coach challenges or a community member challenges a student who is participating based on their gender and says that, you know, student X is not supposed to be participating with the girls. And what would happen under our old rule, under the current rule, is that student could get removed. And that student would then have the burden of trying to prove their eligibility. And what we have worked to do is actually say that if that participation is being challenged, then what is really being done is the school is being challenged, and the school is being challenged for putting an ineligible athlete out on the field to play. Okay, so what we've done then is said that the burden shouldn't be on the student. The burden should be on the school to then go back, review their eligibility process, make sure that they've done it the right way. If they have, they can end up following up with the school who's challenging And if they can't, then they would end up reporting a violation of a rule, right? That they've actually put an ineligible student out that shouldn't have participated. So the language is going to end up, like I said, is going to end up really showing a streamlining of process. And we also have developed some Q&A that will end up going along with this as well, that'll end up helping clarify things for athletic directors, and then for parents and for students and for other coaches and for community members to really understand what is an ever-changing aspect of our work. And our committee looked at the Connecticut case that started back in May after the Office of Civil Rights finding against the Connecticut Association, and then the lawsuit that's been filed, and we've been keeping an eye on that. And we also know that there was a number of state laws that were actually proposed to be changed across the country. Ours was one where it would have said that a student would only be able to participate in their gender at birth, and that didn't go anywhere. So right now, our state still says that a student can participate in a sport based on the gender they identify with. So we've aligned our rules to make sure that they fit with our state laws. So we can take questions about that. If anybody has a question about it, you can pop on and ask right now. I'll do the best I can to answer them. But I wanted to introduce that, not to get into a huge debate today. There's going to be a lot of opportunity to discuss. We'll get to that in just a second. And then the diversity, the other one then would be the diverse, I believe so, Steve. I believe Idaho's law got challenged as well, even though it passed. So what about the coaches standards for diversity training and mental health training? So can somebody speak to that, BJ?
Yeah, I'd be happy to speak to that. The adjustment there, as you guys know, currently coaches have to get 5 hours of continued education every 3 years. And our language says it may include medical, legal, and psychosocial. So we have an amendment that is being recommended not to change the 5 hours in the every 3 years, but just to include that it must include 1 hour in each of the 4 categories. So 1 hour in medical, 1 hour in legal, 1 hour in psychosocial, which hasn't changed, but then adding a 4th category of DEI. So diversity, equity, and inclusion. Also adding some other potential topics under legal, adding bullying, hazing, and harassment under legal as an option, adding restorative education, mental health, suicide prevention, social emotional learning under the psychosocial, and under DEI, adding several categories like anti-racism, discrimination, gender, LGBTQ, diverse backgrounds, income disparity. Those are a lot of educational touch points that I think are currently happening in many schools. We want to make sure they fit under the categories and the addition of DEI. So if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer those. But that is an amendment that we put forward to our executive board that they are supporting to go forward.
Thank you, BJ. That's great. I do know that many of our school districts, diversity and equity and inclusion are not just words that are being used. They're actually becoming the foundation of the work. You could hear that in Carissa's presentation right now also, and the fact that what she's advocating for is the use of data. I can tell you right now, one of the things that I hear on a regular basis here in Bellevue is what is the data showing, and that data includes whether we have barriers to participation in certain populations of our students, and how are we going to know that unless we can end up really digging into what diversity, equity, and inclusion work means for us in the extracurricular world also. So as we move forward, it's going to be really important for us to make sure our coaches are going to, especially those that are coming from the community that are not involved in this work as an educator 24/7, that they end up understanding a shift in the educational, just the educational mindset, not only across the country, but definitely in our state of Washington as well. Just one other amendment really, and then if anybody else has one that they want to share that they are looking to submit before December 11th, I'm happy to hear from others. But I shared a couple weeks ago that that I am potentially I'm potentially going to be submitting an amendment related to WIAA Rule 35, which is a football rule. You know, dealing with some reordering of that particular rule, but also really specifically around summer, clarifying what is and what is not allowed in the summertime. I did see in the executive board minutes that Justin is taking this particular topic to SMAC, and SMAC will be looking at it also. And really one of the things that I want is for a wide conversation about just the difference in how football is treated from the rest of sports, and what are the real reasons for some of those changes going into effect a few years ago, and is it time to do some things a little bit differently? So I had a great conversation a couple weeks ago with, or actually last Wednesday with about 15 athletic directors about this particular amendment that I'm going to submit. Anybody else that is thinking about an amendment right now? We have 9 days until they're due. I hate being the English teacher who says, yes, your essay is due in 9 days, knowing that people are going to wait until the 8th to write them. But remember, you have lots of signatures you have to get. And so making sure that that is written and you gather those signatures now is going to be really key. So anybody have one that they want to share with the group right now?
Hey, Jeff, while we wait, one of the other things in the board minutes that was maybe flying under the radar is we're going to set up, depending on how many amendments we get in, a monthly, basically Zoom town hall, where we're going to ask rep assembly members to attend as part of the discussion, and then either proponents and or opponents to any amendments to come on and have conversations and discussions around them. So that way rep assembly members are able to hear from both sides and also share any information they're coming to ask questions. So by the time we get to end of April, start of May to vote, we'll be well-versed and educated on what we're voting on. So, and also, Jeff, I want to publicly thank you for your diligence on going through that handbook and bringing up suggested edits over the course of the year, because those are very helpful. We would invite that from all our members as you go through and you find parts that don't flow with the rest of it, to make us aware so we can get those to the board for review as well. So thanks, Jeff.
Well, I'm gonna say you're welcome, and you know, it's one of those weird things that I still find enjoyable. You know, that reading through that stuff and making sure that I understand it. I'd like to be able to understand it, to be able to share, and what I would end up saying to any of the 167 of you who are still on here, if you're looking at your handbook and you have questions and not quite sure what you're reading or anything else, and you want to talk to somebody about ambiguity or something that doesn't make sense, that's one of the ways I geek out. I'm not a big video game guy. I'm not a big, I don't get into that kind of stuff, but I would talk handbook language all day long. So it's me publicly just calling out one of my quirks, and there are many. And then Mick, I'll also say you jumped the gun just a little bit. So we'll go out of order and talk a little bit about that amendment timeline. And then I'm going to come back and I'm going to introduce a topic and one that I want people to think about. It may not be, I don't think there's enough time for an amendment this year, but I think there is time. I think it's time to start this conversation. So we're going to come back to that in a second. But that amendment timeline that Mick was talking about, the idea of these Wednesday conversations in February and in March, and we're also, they're also in the amendment timeline. There's a whole list of it, 12 or 14 dates that are in the in an appendix to the executive board minutes. The WSSAAA Wednesdays are going to be a portion devoted to amendment discussions. And then the Wednesdays that are set up to be these amendment discussions Mick, I'll throw out to you, and Tom, I know you're on the call also, and it was something that the district directors had talked about. I'll throw out that the WSSAAA Wednesday extension could be used for that. It is a time that everybody already has set on their calendar. And so instead of trying to book out a different time during the week, let's just continue to house in on Wednesday mornings. And that way people have them on their calendar already. Okay, does that make sense?
It does. You know what? We'll take a look at it. The one thing is, we know that some folks are teaching and aren't able to get away in the Wednesday
And that's true.
mornings.
That is very true.
So we're trying to find a way to make sure we get everybody opportunity to be in a live discussion. But we'll take another look at it and then run it through the board here in December.
Okay. So keep that one in mind. If and then, you know, there's lots of options. The idea of an evening option then becomes problematic in other ways. Never a great time for everybody. But that way the time is on everybody's calendar. What I'm encouraged by, I will say this, Mick, since you and I are having a conversation here in some ways, what I am encouraged by is just the level of detail that's been added to this particular process. And if you guys that are on the call haven't really thrown yourself into the amendment process and the rep assembly process, it is one of the great parts of this association. And one of the, you know, we're talking about how to create influence, how to really make sure that your voice is being heard and you're able to influence decisions. This is your chance. And if you don't end up throwing yourself into these conversations at the league level, at your district level, through your rep assembly member, you know, even coming and listening to the rep assembly as a guest, sitting in the back of the room, even though you may not be voting, those things are key to making sure that there is a widespread discussion where all points are heard before a decision is made. And I'm really, really thrilled to see this level of detail so that we have some in-depth discussions about things in a year that is really seen things changing. So the beginning of the conversation, and I've heard this from a couple of people over the last week since last Wednesday, and they asked this question. So I'm just going to throw it out to the group just to start a conversation today. Maybe take 5 minutes, 10 minutes to talk about it. And they base this question off of Summer 2.0 and the fact that the executive board saw fit to think outside the box and provide kids with an opportunity to do something that they never would have been able to do any other time. And what have we heard? Those of us who actually have had kids working with their school teams and their school district coaches, I can tell you personally, I've heard from multiple parents who have said that it has been the highlight, even when their kids are doing club sports, it has been the highlight of that kid's fall. So the question is really basic. Is it time to revamp our out of season rules? There was an attempt a couple of years ago to you know, potentially as an experiment to mirror what Oregon was doing. But is it time to totally revamp these rules? Right now we have no contact. And is it time to think about it? So what I'm asking you just right now, how many of you would think this is a good idea? Not a good idea? I just want to start a 5-minute, 10-minute conversation. How many of you have been thinking about it, but don't know where to start?
Jeff, this is Tony Davis. I'm glad you're bringing this up. I actually called down and spoke to folks at the Oregon Association, and you know, nothing but positive things to say about what their programs are experiencing. Again, that's only one person that I spoke to. It feels like, as a coach and an AD, our rules have opened the door for these outside groups. I'm a big believer in multi-sport. I was multi-sport. My kids were multi-sport athletes. And that's why I think I lean toward what Oregon's doing with I believe it's 6 weeks of hands off. And then the Monday of the 7th week, coaches can start working with their kids again. I do think it's time to start having this conversation and to look at things differently. We're evolving. We're not the same. The situation's not the same as it was 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago. It's a conversation that needs to take place. The best place for, I believe that the best place for our kids is with us.
Tony Davis, I appreciate you turning your mic on. It's always good to hear from you. And I would say we don't hear from you quite as often as I would like. You bring a really calming presence to a conversation when you turn your mic on and end up sharing. So thank you for starting that conversation that way.
Jeff, I'm also in agreement with that we need to look at how things might change. I do think that we need to look at all other sports. I know last week in our meeting that you and I had, there was a topic about, what does PE look like? And how are kids getting credit in PE? And I know that that's kind of a hot topic, but we're losing kids to outside sports. Some parts of the state are different. I even think it's different for classification. A B school and an A school might not have the same needs that a 4A school has, just with the size of populations and what's available to kids outside. So I think it needs to become, a pretty broad examination, and one that would take a lot of, considerate time and not something that would be rushed.
Thank you, Jeff. I would agree with that also, that the idea of doing this, you do it right, it ends up becoming a huge benefit to everybody. You do it wrong, and we're cleaning up messes for a long time too. So I appreciate that thought. Anybody else want to jump in? I'm seeing some other comments in the chat. The idea of being able to look at other states, study what they do. I'm gonna ask this, and Steve, I would agree with you there that the lockdown really demonstrates how much kids need coaches and need structured activity. I can honestly say that we have in Bellevue a really strong coaches association. We bargain with them. What I can say is if our coaches, had the opportunity to work with kids throughout the rest of the year, then there would be bargaining. And I welcome that particular conversation. Also, I welcome the opportunity to sit down at a table with an association and say, what would that look like? How would it be done? And then I think part of what I wonder about is then what everybody is hearing, and that's budget cuts. Some of us may be in a position where it would be, hey, you get to volunteer and do this if you want to, and you don't get to if you don't want to, which then gets into the diversity, equity, and inclusion kind of conversation as well. So how would we be able to make sure that it was going to be equitable for everybody becomes a question that goes to the forefront of my mind. And I welcome that conversation, like I said. Like I said, anybody else? I didn't intend this to be we're solving a problem today, but more of is it time and how do we end up doing this?
Hey, Jeff, I was on that committee originally that looked at this, and there was, I've been trying to rack my brain a little bit to remember some of the things, but one of the things, the system we have right now is not real equitable. And what we had was a lot of rural schools who don't have access to club coaches, who don't have access to maybe the money to go travel and do some of those things. Some of the higher free and reduced lunch schools had lower participation in those travel teams and club coaches or personal coaches and all those things their kids are going to right now. And so that was part of the thought process that we had back then is if we would allow those coaches, sometimes in those communities, there might only be one coach that can help those kids out, and that would be their head coach. And so that was a big part of why we, kind of what we decided, what we put forward. We weren't quite ready for it then. I think times have changed, and I think it's a great conversation.
Okay. Can I just jump in, Ryan? It's a great point. And I don't think it's rural. I think it's city schools as well.
Both.
There's
Yeah.
a financial gap that's
Yep.
being created. And I would argue that the elite kid, they're going to get their opportunities to be trained.
Yeah.
You know, in fact, they'd be elite if nobody trained them. I think what this pandemic has taught us is that it's that best way to say it, I guess, is that average athlete who maybe isn't going to be that college-bound kid, but sports is a huge impact on them, and they're not necessarily doing anything. They're not the one that's going to be on paying the thousands of dollars to be on some of these club and select and travel teams. And if they do have the money to do it, quite frankly, I can give you examples of where they're being taken advantage of. They're the ones that are paying the money that is funding the elite kids who aren't paying anything. So they go through it. So I don't think it's just a rural issue. I think it's financially based city programs as well.
Agreed.
Not up.
Hey, also, I think that with a lot of the rules, you know, and I've only been here for a limited amount of time, so I'm not privy to how a lot of things came about, but I think with a lot of our rules, they're going to have to be looked at through a lens of diversity, equity, and inclusion in a way in which they weren't before. And this is also one of those, you know, Ryan brings that up. It may not have been at that point when it first came about, but now we're at a point where it's definitely something that we can do to not just this rule, but all the rules.
Thank you, Kyle. And for those who don't know, Kyle McKenna from Mercer Island by way of New York. So he's only been here for a couple of years and asked really great questions, you know, from a now Washingtonian perspective that still has the lens of a guy from the East Coast. So, so I appreciate that too. I think this is a great place to start this conversation. Here's what I'm hoping that we can do. So Mick and Tim and what I'm hoping that we can do is actually get a request to the executive board to get a committee back together to take a look at out of season again. It is time. I would just summarize what I'm hearing from many of the people on this call right now and what I've heard from others in the last week. It's time to really do what it is that Karissa asked us to do earlier, and that is take a look at what we've learned we do well, take a look at what we've learned that we need to improve, and take a look at what we can commit to carrying forward. And I think that what we've seen with Summer 2.0, with those of us who have done it, is that there is a way to do this where we don't end up overwhelming a coach and say, you're working 5 days a week, 50 weeks out of the year, really for a 12-week season. And instead, what we're saying is you have the opportunity to remain in contact and continue to develop your kids in a way that's going to be beneficial to them, to the school community, to you, to your program, blah, blah, blah. So I'm hoping we can get the executive board to take a look at that and potentially it's either a committee that way. And if they don't want to do it a committee that way, then I would say I'm happy to talk to those that are here. And I would agree. I'll come back to what John just wrote in the chat. You know, I'd be happy to say then I think we could put a committee together of athletic directors to do this on behalf of athletic directors and present it at next year's for next year's amendment process.
Jeff, this is going to be a huge undertaking. Like,
yeah.
It's not a small topic based on so many different issues, but you know, the idea that you just presented with, you know, allowing coaches to stay in contact with kids over a period of time is a phenomenal idea. But what is it going to turn into? It's going to turn into, how can my program get an advantage? How can my program get an advantage? How can my program? That's exactly what happened to summer programs, right? So before, I guess I'll take myself back to high school. My freshman year of high school was the first year that football camps were widely accessible for multiple different programs. So before that, what happened? There was no off-season football, and if there was, it was conditioning, right? Or maybe for the elite programs, but it slowly trickled down to where now everybody's going to multiple camps in the summer. We've reduced the number of days. Basketball, baseball is playing 60, 70 games in the summer. Like, it's just that constant challenge of how do I get in a competitive advantage? And if we, I mean, what we allow, we're going to face that exact conversation is who's going to do what to gain that competitive advantage based on the parameters that we give them, right? So no matter what, we're still going to run into those equity issues, whether it's club-based or school-based.
So I, you know, Cole, and I've kind of let the cat out of the bag that you and I are potentially talking about podcasting, but this would end up being one of those hour-long conversations you and I can have. And what I would say is that what we really need to be doing as we examine this particular issue is going back to why. What is the why behind educational-based athletics? The why behind educational-based athletics is not to say I line my trophy case. The why between educational-based athletics is not to say I have 15 people in this pro league that came out of my school. The why behind doing this is all of the other things that we end up knowing provide value to somebody's life because they participated, right? So every one of us wants our kids to leave our programs better people. If they're better athletes, that's a side benefit in many, many ways. And so I agree with you. While I agree with you that what we'd have to do is make sure that everybody who understands that the reason to do this is not to say, okay, you know, Ellensburg High School now can gain a competitive advantage over everybody else in their particular league because of X, Y, and Z. The why behind this is the social emotional well-being of our student athletes, the academic performance of our student athletes, the skill development of our student athletes, the leadership development, all of those other things, that's the why. Wins and losses are not the why, right? So I think that's going to be a big piece of it. And I agree with you. It is going to be a heavy lift, which is why a committee is the only way really to get this done. You have one person trying to gather all the information, it's going to become a full-time job. And I'm going to go back to something that John Applegate ended up writing in the chat a few minutes ago here, and that is the fact that coaches can't volunteer for their own job. So if in fact we end up having somebody who coaches a fall sport and we tell them, hey, by the way, you can work with your athletes in February, but you're not going to get paid for it, you have a potential wage claim issue. You're looking at potentially having somebody that says, wait a minute, you're asking me to work right now. You're expecting me to work and I'm not getting paid for it. So, you know, so there is, and that's what John said, the Lake Washington School District started compensating coaches for summer work. The Bellevue School District has done the same thing. You know, there is really clear Fair Labor Standards Act language about that. And again, I'll put a shameless plug in for one of the LTC courses. One of the LTC legal courses ends up dealing with the Fair Labor Standards Act. And you can end up hearing about that a little bit more if you sign up. All right. Thank you, Tim Thompson, for saying that that's going to get on the agenda. I don't want to beat a dead horse today, but this is, again, a topic. And Cole, we'll talk. We'll get a podcast together. You and I, maybe this will be the kickoff topic, and everybody can listen.
Jeff, I might just add that very thing about the coaches and whether they're volunteering or getting paid, that's been the biggest problem that I've had during this open coaching period. Is we've had a couple programs that the coaches just decided that they didn't want to participate in, and so we didn't have them. And that in turn led to the largest amount of complaining and the biggest group of parents almost in a lynch mob kind of mentality towards some of our coaches because they chose to not volunteer their time and not spend time with their kids. And as a result, our kids couldn't get out and do stuff. So, I mean, there's other that's a huge aspect to all of this as we proceed.
I agree with you, Jim. You know, a couple of folks in the chat, I appreciate the like I said, I wanted to start a conversation and really really want to continue to circle back and say every perspective is key. And that's why we end up doing this. This is actually one of the things that we've done fantastically since March. Cole and BJ, your brainchild is actually something that has taken on a life of its own. I can say, is there a fear that things would explode because parents will expect? There is. All right, but part of what we just heard Karissa talk about is how do we end up making sure that we stay out in front of parents? So if this work is being done, and it's being done over the course of really 18 months, and the information is coming out, why wait until the rule is changed to start talking to parents about how this is going to shift and how it may end up shifting in your communities, and talk to your coaches ahead of time about how, there's all sorts of ways to stay ahead of this. And Gary, I would love to hear just for a minute or two, just a little bit more about what you wrote there a couple minutes ago. College team towards a professional model, high school teams toward the college model, and share your thoughts with everybody.
Well, I guess what I meant to a lot of it comes down to the dollar. So many of our parents and kids that we're getting in high school now, it's all about, you got to get me a scholarship. And I've never laid that out as part of any coach's job description in high school. The colleges, with the money that the coaches are being paid, with the demand of year round and the meeting and the off-season workouts, and the evolution of the sport, the colleges are now mimicking what a professional system looks like, and high schools are now mimicking what the college system looks like. I was with Cole. Cole might be a little bit younger than me. There wasn't football camps in the summer. Summer for us, we might have played one weekend of a basketball tournament, but it was baseball season or track season, and we did that all summer long. There was no football, let alone now. Coaches are chomping at the bit for that state track meet to get over so they can start spring football, just like the colleges were doing. So we've just kind of shifted everything up a level, that we're the high school programs are mimicking the college programs, and the college programs are mimicking the professional programs. And I don't know, like I said, how to stop that momentum and get the culture to understand, hey, look, this is not what the high school athletic program is about.
I'll tell you a story. My last year coaching a high school swim team, and I was I can tell you I was a lucky guy. 50 some kids sitting in the stands in this pool, and it was probably one of the most, if not the most talented group of swimmers ever to set foot on a pool deck at the beginning of a high school sports season, high school winter swim season in the history of the state, right? So rivaled anything that anybody had ever put together. And I can still remember clearly one thing that I ended up saying to them, and they understood. And I said to them, look, if you're here to win or to lose, or you're here for a college scholarship, you're here for the wrong reason. If you're here to get better because you want to listen, you want to work hard for 2 hours, if you can give me 2 hours every day and you can work hard in those 2 hours, then you will be better. You will be better for being here. And those are my rules. And I didn't come into your house and ask you to show up. I didn't call your parents and recruit you. I didn't make promises to anybody. So I'm going to give you 30 seconds to think about it. And if you can follow those rules, show up every day, work hard for 2 hours, and commit to getting better every day, then you're welcome to stay. But if you can't, no skin off my back. I'll see you in the hallway. I'll still pat you on the back. We'll still be friendly, right? Not a big deal. And I can tell you right now, not a kid left. And never once did I have to raise my voice to any kid that was on that team. Never once did I have anybody that wasn't focused on the same thing and understood that everything that we were doing was to help them get better as individuals, as people that ended up helping the collective. And I wonder when I see things that are going on around me about that people feel like there needs to be promises made and parents wonder about promises that can be made. I hear way too often, the only way my kid can get to the next level. And I'm like, well, shit, you've lost already. I mean, really, you've lost already. Why are you even doing this? There's so many things out of your control. So control what you can control, right? And that to me is kind of where this particular topic, before even a committee gets together, there needs to be a why behind the committee, a why behind what we're doing, and why we would be doing it. And I love the conversation that continues to go on about volunteerism and pay and really the idea that we don't want to create a system where we're tearing apart families because we're asking, well-meaning individuals to do too much, right? I love it. I love all of it. I'm glad I brought it up. I'm glad that you guys were willing to jump in today. And I think it's going to be the beginning of a really interesting year. Thank you. Thank you for all of that. Next Wednesday, WSSAAA Wednesday extension. I promise you guys have heard from me for a number of weeks. I'll be getting the mentors involved next week. And we're going to be looking at those 3 questions that Karissa ended up bringing up. I heard them today and I said, this is going to be what we're talking about next week. What can we, the WIAA, and member schools commit to carrying forward from what we've learned from this time? And coming out of that, what have we learned that we, WIAA, WSSAAA member schools do well? And what have we together learned that we need to improve? And we'll end up talking about that. That'll be the framework of our conversation next week. Jim Beeson asked a really good question, and that is, does anybody have the latest HB 1660 FAQ document? It's actually, I'm going to put the link in the chat for everybody. And this is actually their HB 1660 page. Their FAQ document was updated last on October 27th, so it hasn't been updated since then. Okay. All right, knowing that we're coming close to 10 o'clock, and my guess is everybody else has other things they would like to do today. Anybody have any final thoughts?
Hey, Jeff, was it updated after our discussion with them, or was that before?
That was after.
Okay, thanks.
Anybody else, any final thoughts? Any final questions? Anything else you'd like to have a follow-up on next week?
I have one quick question. We're looking at going to the WIAA physical forum, but in talking to Steve and a lot of other ADs, do we know, is there a reason why that 4th page needs to be a part of that physical packet instead of just having, because it's confusing parents on which form they print off, which one they go get signed. I was just curious why there's a 4th page attached to it. I know it was added a few years ago.
I'm going to leave that up to somebody from the WIAA. And if we can't get an answer for you today, Jason, then what I'm going to do is write a note and I'll have an update next week for sure.
Sounds good. Thanks.
Yeah, Jason, let me pull it up. I'll reach out to you and give you an explanation on it. I just need to pull the form up and look at it again.
Okay, thank you.
And would you make sure, Justin, that you send that to me and I can share it with everybody next week too?
Yeah, you bet.
Okay, anything else for the good of the order? All right, Cole started by asking people what fires them up. I can tell you that the one thing that definitely fires me up every week is being able to jump on a call with all of you. It maybe sounds stupid. This is me geeking out just a little bit also, but but having these conversations, I get some chills. This is cool. And cool for a lot of different reasons. I said last week, going into Thanksgiving, I'm thankful for the opportunity to be able to connect with people from across the state and see faces. And hear from people that I would not have heard from otherwise. You guys are the best and the brightest And I certainly appreciate this opportunity to spend time with all of you every week. Thank you for the opportunity to jump in and facilitate a conversation. And I think every week we end up coming up with something that's just going to make us better and stronger as we move forward. So that's my parting shot for everybody.
Couldn't agree with you more, sir. Thank you for everything.